Hey everyone, it's Nathan Orenstein with The No Show, here to talk about The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It is written by David Leslie Johnson-McGoldrick, directed by Michael Chaves, and stars Patrick Wilson, Vera Farmiga, Rory O'Connor, and Sarah Catherine Hook. It is the third film in the Conjuring franchise's mainline series and is showing in theaters and on HBO Max. The Devil Made Me Do It is about the real-life trial of convicted murderer Arnie Cheyenne Johnson, played by Rory O'Connor, from 1981. After assisting in the exorcism of Arnie's younger brother a few months prior, paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, played by Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, believe that the same demon has somehow possessed Arnie and caused him to murder the victim. The movie basically follows the Warrens' investigation into this case, as well as Arnie's continued possession while in prison and the pain that he has to suffer there. For this review, I'm going to spend a decent amount of time comparing The Devil Made Me Do It to The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2, which is something that I generally don't like to do. I do want to make it clear that you don't need to see any of the other movies in this franchise to fully understand The Devil Made Me Do It, or my review for that matter. I do think that the best way to assess this movie is through comparison though, so let's get right into it. The original Conjuring proved to be a landmark horror film for the 2010s. Not only did it kick off the highest earning horror franchise of all time, it's also just a really, really good horror movie that does a lot of things right. Co-created and directed by James Wan, the co-creator of the Saw and Insidious franchises, The Conjuring proved to be arguably his best work to date, leaning very heavily into typical horror tropes while also perfecting their usage in the context of a based-on-real-life haunted house/possession story. He followed it up with The Conjuring 2 3 years later in 2016, which took a very similar, if not as precise approach, while also doubling down on scares. The end result is a film that's almost just as good as its predecessor, but it also served as a catalyst for a slew of spin-offs that were far too frequent and far inferior in quality. So now we get to The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. 4 spin-offs and 5 years after The Conjuring 2. We've abandoned the haunted house narrative of the first 2 Conjuring movies in favor of a more cat-and-mouse investigation type thing. Think Zodiac or Prisoners. We still have the Warrens front and center here, along with all the spooky things that come with them, but we've lost James Wan at the helm in favor of Michael Chaves, fresh off the absolute train wreck that was The Curse of La Llorona. It's a sea change for the mainline franchise, and honestly, not one for the best. In my opinion, part of what makes The Conjuring so compelling as a based-on-a-true-story horror movie is its commitment to the reality that it's created. The Warrens are real people who were really committed to their investigation into the paranormal, and The Conjuring does a great job of capturing that while obviously playing things up with Hollywood theatrics. Anchored by a simple one-location approach, writers Chad and Carrie W. Hayes were really able to turn their attention on establishing the connections between the characters and the paranormal. And this authenticity really made things all the more scary once things start to go south. A very similar approach was taken with The Conjuring 2, but we really don't get any of that in The Devil Made Me Do It. Like I mentioned before, this is more of a cat-and-mouse style investigation, so the Warrens are always on the move. We're introduced to many more characters and many more locations than the previous movies, and the writing kind of falls flat because it doesn't focus on any single person, place, or thing. We also have 2 separate scenarios going on here. We got the Warrens' investigation, and we got Arnie's time in prison. Unfortunately, these 2 things never really connect that well, and the way the movie bounces between the 2 feels unnatural and jagged. The Devil Made Me Do It just doesn't feel as convincing as its predecessors either, and it comes across as just as generic as any other run-of-the-mill horror movie. That realism and believability that was present in the first 2 just isn't here, and the movie really suffers because of that. It also just isn't that scary either. I think this is where losing James Wan is the most noticeable, as he's become a master of the horror genre. His scares are usually well crafted, perfectly paced, and leave a lasting impression. On the other hand, Michael Chaves has gone for an almost purely jump scare approach, and the jump scares really aren't that good. We're also lacking any of the scary imagery that really lasts with you, and what we get is a horror movie that kinda lacks horror. There are a few good scenes here, I will admit, but not enough to really make much of anything in this movie memorable. The biggest fault of The Devil Made Me Do It, though, is that it's boring. A boring movie is unpleasant. A boring horror movie is inexcusable. Like I said, it really isn't very scary, which is definitely a huge problem, but even more pressing is that the story just isn't very enticing, and there really aren't any memorable plot points here. It tries to be a sort of paranormal detective type movie, I guess you could say, but it just isn't as cool or even interesting as that sounds. Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga's chemistry here is still 100% the best part of the movie, but really that's the only thing that was that entertaining. It's the only good quality of the first two Conjuring movies that carries over here. The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It is a painfully mediocre horror movie, and in many ways that's worse than being a bad horror movie. A bad horror movie you can at least laugh at a lot of the time, poke fun at it, but with The Devil Made Me Do It, there really isn't much good or bad here to really get excited about in either direction. It doesn't resemble a Conjuring movie, and that's fine. The problem is it doesn't build any sort of identity for itself either. It's just... If you watch these movies purely for Ed and Lorraine Warren, then yeah, maybe give this one a chance. But if not, I really just can't recommend seeing this one. I'm going to be giving The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It a 5 out of 10. If you enjoyed the review, then feel free to like and subscribe if you're new. And if you've already seen The Devil Made Me Do It, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. I've been Nathan Orenstein with The No Show. Thanks for watching.